This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzahon, and it's Saturday, and that means it's time for Nizzanotes, my weekly vlog series about limited magic. I don't know if the mic is picking it up or not, but it's raining like crazy, so we have some rainy ambiance, I guess, for today's topic, where we'll be taking a look at 5 cards I think you should stop playing in Neon Dynasty. Not just cards that everyone knows you shouldn't play, but cards that I continue to see people playing for one reason or another. But if you stop playing them, you'll probably be better off. So let's talk first about Hadetsugu Consumes All. So this one, I get why people want to play it. It's a really cool card. It does a bunch of stuff. It's good in some constructed formats, especially the Eternal ones. And it's also, a character. Hadetsugu is a character a lot of people like from old Kamigawa. It's a saga. Most of the sagas are really good, etc. But overall, this one is bad. Its first 2 chapters don't do anything. Chapter 1 will very rarely ever hit anything. Chapter 2 doesn't really have much of an impact on the format. And Chapter 3, you do finally get a creature, and for the mana you paid, it's kind of okay, but by the time it can attack on turn 6, it's not really a relevant creature anymore. So, there's a lot going on here. It's a mythic, it's a saga, sagas are good. There's a lot going on that makes people want to play this, but there's a reason that it has one of the worst win rates on 17 lands. If you don't know 17 lands, I'll try to remember to put the link in the description. 17lands.com, it provides a lot of data for limited formats, and you can actually look up what the win rate is for a specific card. Now, the data is not perfect. At some point, I want to do a 17 lands edition of Nizzanotes where I talk about, the strengths and weaknesses of utilizing 17 lands. Mostly, you're going to be better off for using it. But, don't put everything into the data. Data is not perfect, just like, people aren't. But the point is, Hadetsugu Consumes All, it feels terrible when you play it. If you've ever played against it, it feels terrible. And then the data also says it's awful. So it's not a good card, as cool as it is. Another one I see people playing, and I wish they would stop, is Enormous Energy Blade. Yeah, this one I feel like should be obvious, but I've seen people playing it enough that I think it's important to say that you shouldn't. It does give a big power boost for the cost, and that's cool, but it's just so slow. The creature you put it on in a given turn can't attack with it, and that's part of the value of equipment, is that you make a difference right away. This doesn't do it. So even though it gives a fairly efficient stat boost, like if this didn't have the tap line on it, it would be a good limited card. But that tap line makes a huge difference. And overall, it's just not very good. Might have been a little better if like the modification sub-theme in black panned out more often, but it just doesn't. And Enormous Energy Blade is not playable. You should stop playing it. It's another card with a horrible win rate on 17 lands. Aki War Paint is next. So this card, in some formats, would be kind of okay. 1 mana for +2/+1 is kind of a serious boost. It really does change things for you frequently the turn you cast it, right? But the problem with this format is that, it's a format filled with 2-for-1s. Your opponent and you are getting 2-for-1s off your sagas. A lot of the best cards in the format do things that are just massive, make 3 bodies, the Oath that makes 3 samurai. You just have all these cards that give you multiple cards worth of value. And so setting yourself up with Aki War Paint to get 2-for-1 is bad. You don't want to be handing your opponent another 2-for-1. They've probably got several cards in their deck that will already do that for them. And so slapping this aura on your creature, just, it's not a great plan. It's just not going to pan out well often enough. You're going to get 2-for-1. The boost isn't enough. And it's just a really terrible card. This is another card where, if the modification theme in red-green had panned out more, maybe it'd be a little better, but it's hard to see any aura that doesn't give you some sort of extra value being worth playing in this format. Next, we've got a rare Invoke Calamity. I think the other 4 Invoke cards are all perfectly playable. Mana's good enough in this format that you can make them work a decent chunk of the time. I do think people play them a little too often because, you need 12 sources of mana to pay to consistently get quad black or whatever. But Invoke Calamity, it has that same problem, but then the payoff is just not impressive and limited. For one thing, this format doesn't really have a spell deck. I mean, there are spells in decks, of course. In some formats, I think Invoke Calamity would be a little better because there's usually like a blue-red spells deck, but that's not really what we have in this format. And so you don't end up with enough instants and sorceries in your graveyard that have a combined value of 6 or less that are really that valuable for you to spend 5 mana, including quad red casting. And I say graveyard only because once you're using this to just cast things out of your hand, it is much worse. You're basically giving up a card to cast 2 cards for, at best, 1 less mana than you could have cast them for anyway, right? Because you're spending 5 and you get to cast 6 mana worth of between 2 cards. That's just not good. These Invoke cards are exciting. It's kind of like Hadetsugu Consumes All, and it's cool that the mana is good enough to cast them, but it is very, very difficult to end up with a deck that works with Invoke Calamity in this format. You have to be doing it out of your graveyard for it to be worth playing, and it's very hard to set it up. It's maybe a little less impossible than some of the others on this list. Like if you end up with a lot of, red and blue spells that, are 3 mana or less that you can actually cast with this, it might work out sometimes. But the thing is, people get so excited when they see this and take it so early that you're never going to get it if you're trying to make Invoke Calamity work. It's just, you'd have to take it early to do it, and it's not worth doing because it's too difficult to make it work. So it's a cool rare like Hadetsugu Consumes All, but it's also one that you should not be playing. And the last of these 5 cards that I've seen people play way more than they should is Discover the Impossible. This card, it's in Constructed, it's not bad. Same with Invoke Calamity, by the way. That's also, I think, part of the reason why people overrate them. You can do silly things with some of this stuff in Constructed, but you can't in Limited. And Discover the Impossible has kind of a cool, unique take on an effect, like an Anticipate-like effect. You get to look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you exile 1, and you put it into your hand. Or, if the card you exile costs 2 mana or less, you get to cast it for free. So part of the problem here is spending this much mana to really just get 1 card. You're basically drawing 1 card, even with this kind of card selection, is a bad idea. Everyone else at 3 mana is playing sagas, like they're going to get so much more value out of their sagas than you're going to get out of this. It's cool if you cast this, and you hit a Kami's Flare and you cast it for free. That's kind of neat, but it's still not great. It's another card that suffers from the lack of a real spell deck. It would be better maybe if it did, because you could get 2 spell triggers out of this for only 3 mana. You could find a spell to get all your spell payoffs going, but that's not a thing in this format. And Discover the Impossible just ends up not being worth it. It's just too much mana to not impact the board, and you don't really even gain a card. Even if you get to do the cool, look, I cast a spell for free thing, you're not really getting a card there. You're just breaking even. And that's the best this card can do. And cards that are like that, kind of like Aki War Paint, a card that has the danger of a 2-for-1, cards like that are extra bad in this format. You don't have the time, you don't have the time, and you need to be getting more value out of your mana if you're going to, get there. There are definitely dirtily grindy decks in this format, but they're usually built around actually adding to the board and finding a way to survive, as opposed to sort of spinning its wheels by casting Discover the Impossible. So those are 5 cards I think people should stop playing in this limited format. Hopefully, if you are playing any of them, I've convinced you to stop. If not, I'm sure some of you will be defending these cards in the comments, as is inevitable when one makes a YouTube video. So yeah, go for it. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments why you think these cards are good, if you think they are. All right, so let's close things out with a Crank-A-Pack from Neon Dynasty, as we've been doing the last several weeks. All right, here's our pack as usual. I'll talk about every card in this pack and talk about which one I would first pick. So our first card is an island. Obviously, we're not picking that. Next up, we've got a saga, Tales of Master Sashiro. Like most sagas in the set, this is pretty darn good. It gives you absurd value for the mana, even if it does take a few turns, but it's turned out in this format, taking a few turns is just fine when you're sort of getting a clock started on something very real happening, it's a big deal. Plus, chapters 1 and 2 aren't insignificant on most boards. I mean, they really change things for you, often allowing you to attack right away. And then the creature you get is, it's got haste. It gets in there right away, which is pretty sweet. It's a card that I kind of hope we don't first pick, but it's kind of a passable-ish one. I mean, we hope it doesn't happen, but it's pretty good. Not bad to see as our first common. Wanderer's Intervention is next. This is fine. It's situational removal. As I've said numerous times in this series, removal's a little worse in this format than normal. Doesn't mean it's bad. Doesn't mean it's unplayable. But in a world where sagas and other 2-for-1 cards exist, just trying to trade 1-for-1 is a less valuable strategy. You still need removal, of course, because not everything, sometimes you still need to kill the Sashiro 5/5 creature, even if you kind of feel like you're not getting the best value. Killing that thing is a good deal, even though your opponent also got 2 counters out of it. And you have to do it, but I'm just saying you should value it a little less in this format than in most, and that kind of goes double for a situational removal spell like Intervention. It's a solid playable, but we'd definitely rather have Tales of Master Sashiro. We've got Armguard Familiar next. This one is my preview card. It's been a solid little playable. Definitely not something you take with a first pick, but if you're in an blue artifact deck, it's a nice 2-drop to have around. That generally ends up being the best place for it, but it's kind of fine in any blue deck. We definitely still want to take Tales of Master Sashiro. Next up, we've got Reckoner Shakedown. This is a card that almost made this video where I was talking about, 5 cards you should stop playing. And it's not great, certainly, but I think it's kind of okay. I don't feel as strongly about it as the other 5 cards where I said, you don't play these, period. I think it's kind of all right. It's right on that border, though, and it's not very good. But, yeah. So, Kami of Industries next. This has been maybe a little bit of an underperformer. There are enough interesting things you can do with it, enough interesting cards you can get back with it, whether it's something you want to sacrifice to your Sokenzen Smelter or a creature that actually does something, when you bring it back from the graveyard. There's several things. Getting a Virus Beetle back with it in black-red is pretty sweet. There's stuff you can do. But it's the kind of card that you sort of expect to wheel, and if you end up in that deck, you pick it up, as opposed to the kind of card where you're like, okay, I guess I'm going to try to be in a graveyard deck that can get value out of the graveyard. Now, you're still on Tales of Master Sashiro here. Next up, we've got Voltage Surge. This is nice. It's another removal spell. It's less situational than Wanderer's Intervention, and it's cheaper, and those things definitely matter. You can use it because it's not, there are more situations where you can use it to generate additional value than there are with Intervention, because Intervention can only target attacking or blocking things. So if your opponent tries to put an aura on something or stuff like that, you can use the Surge. It's nice that it can do 4 when that's what you need in a lot of red decks too. Honestly, though, I'd take Tales of Master Sashiro over it in this format. In a lot of formats, that would seem strange, but I mean, if you've been playing this format, these sagas are strong, and stronger than most, decent removal is. And that's certainly true with Tales of Master Sashiro, even at 5 mana. Dragonfly Suit's next. This has been pretty disappointing. The blue-white vehicle theme in general has been disappointing, and this card's part of that. It's just not... You're not getting that much of an upgrade from whatever you're crewing with it, and that's kind of the bummer. You'd rather have Brute Suit than Dragonfly Suit, and, that's kind of sad. So, not especially good. We're still on Tales of Master Sashiro. Inkrise Infiltrator's next. This is a fine 2-drop. It's especially, it gets a little bit of bonus points in the ninja deck because it is a ninja, and it helps set up ninja stuff because it's evasive, but you don't take it remotely early. We're still on our Tales of Master Sashiro. We've got Zhukai Trainee next. Nice 2-drop. It blocks and attacks reasonably well. Not what we take here, though. It's another just solid 2-drop. Okay, Network Disruptor. Now we're starting to get a little interesting. This format and all the formats lately have had very nice 1-drops, and Network Disruptor is a good one. And it's one I really predicted in my set review. After all the recent 1-drops that are really good, I ended up being right about this card, that it just does so much for its cost, sets up ninja stuff, it's an artifact. I sort of felt like it was going to sort of hold a bunch of archetypes together while just being a good card, and that's kind of how it's turned out. There's plenty I got wrong about, I was wrong about in my set review, some of which I've talked about on here, and I'll eventually do a full what I got wrong video, But Disruptor is one of the cards where I ended up being, I think dead on right. And it's really good. And, it's Tales of Master Sashiro and I think Network Disruptor are somewhat comparable. I think in the end, I would end up going Disruptor here between these two. It just does so much for the cost. It's not quite a saga, but you're also only paying 1 mana and you're getting insane value. In some ways, it kind of feels like a 1 mana saga because you get a creature and you get an effect and you get some synergy that sets stuff up. So it's a neat card. I think I go Disruptor over Tails. Asari Captain's Nexus is the red-white signpost. It's fine. I've had a deck with like 3 of them, and once you really get a critical mass like that, they get kind of silly. And that's cool. But it's not the kind of signpost you first pick over reasonable monocolored cards like Tails or Network Disruptor. Unforgiving One's next. This is okay. I mean, a 3 mana 2/3 with Menace is an okay baseline. And it can generate 2-for-1s for you, which you want to do in this format. But setting that up is pretty inconsistent, even if you're playing like the 1 mana 1/1 who gets a counter. Like consistently making that actually happen for you is hard. So, it's not that great. I think you take Disruptor or Tails or Voltage Surge over it. Probably all of those over the Unforgiving One. Flame Discharge is next. This is a nice removal spell. It's not that hard to get it to do the bonus damage. It's fairly efficient when you can. When you can't, it's kind of awkward and clunky, but it's still a removal spell. The interesting thing is that it's red. And while I don't ever condone, I'm never a fan of just like avoiding a color because it's red, because it's the weakest one in the set. And that's what the data says. And that's, what experience says too. Red on average ends up being weaker than the other colors. That doesn't mean it's unplayable though. But when we're looking at what I think are comparable cards like Network Disruptor and Tales of Master Sashiro, I think I'm on Network Disruptor, and Tails. I would think I would take either of them over Flame Discharge in this format. Just like I would take them over Voltage Surge. Our rare is also red, and it's Lizard Blades. And I think, I just, was talking about how red isn't the best color, and, taking comparable cards of other colors is a good idea. But I don't think there's a card in this pack that's that comparable to Lizard Blades. It's very strong. It's stronger than everything in this pack. It's just the best card. A 2 mana 1/1, a double strike is already a passable creature, and then just being able to reconfigure onto things and making them a huge problem for your opponent is a big deal. It's really strong, makes your creatures better all game long. Your opponent kind of has to deal with it or they're in trouble. The kind of awkward thing is Flame Discharge and Voltage Surge are also in this pack, and they're going to go somewhere probably in the top 5 in this pack. So that means 2 other people might be trying to play red. That said, that's worth remembering and keeping it in mind depending on what signals you see. But I wouldn't say don't take Lizard Blades because there's good red cards in this pack. Plus, some people avoid red entirely in this format or underdraft it to a certain extent. And maybe nobody will take them because they'd rather have, other stuff in this pack than red cards because red's kind of weak. That does happen when you play red. Things wheel that are kind of crazy. Like the Surge wheeling here, probably not insane. So that would be pretty nice. So yeah, Lizard Blades in the end, it's a nice card. It's not a bomb, by the way. I should say. It's just very good. This pack doesn't have a bomb or really any card approaching it. Lizard Blades gets the closest. So that's what I would take. And that does it for this edition of Nizzanotes. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past editions of Nizzanotes where I talk about this format and Limited in general, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. And lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.